Hey guys, it's Chris at the Ultimate Recycler. I'm looking for another upcycle project. Not that I need another project, I've already got about 100 on the go. But I'm trying to tidy my yard a bit, and this was down the back. Now, we did a house clean out a little while back before the pandemic sort of closed things up a bit. And this old bed base ended up in my yard. It's great timber. And single beds, or even double beds for that matter, are very hard to sell. Especially older ones, so I try and repurpose what I can, and this one I put aside because it was a bit good for firewood. And these slats are very nice timber. They're kind of rough sawn, but they have a beautiful grain in them. They're a pine, and they're just a nice shape that I think I might be able to do something with them. So I'll see if they come off nicely off this frame. The nails should pull out okay. If they split at the ends a bit, that's fine. I can trim the ends up. And we'll see what we can make with these pine slats. The rails of the frame are nice, good, solid hardwood, and I'll use them for some building project. But I'll knock it apart and I'll gather all the slats up and we'll see what we can make. And now to try and lever these pieces of pine off, these slats, and just with a large screwdriver here, and it looks like they're going to pull out nicely without any nasty splitting. Some of the nails are coming out and it's leaving some behind, but that's not a problem at all. And here's all the slats. They all come off pretty good. One or two of them did split just a little bit, but most of them are great. Still quite a few nails in these I have to tap out, and they're all really straight, which is excellent. So I'll just tap the last of these nails out, and then we'll try and formulate some plan for it. I've got a rough idea, but this is kind of going to develop as we go. And we're left with this nice frame of quite heavy hardwood. So I'm just going to knock this apart. I don't have a particular use for this timber at this stage, but it's very good quality timber. Even though it's been in the weather for some time, it's still very sturdy, very strong, not warped or split. So that'll be handy for some building project. Nothing of that will be wasted. So, rightio, the moment of truth. I have formulated a plan. I kind of had half an idea, and I've just been laying these slats out, thinking, maybe we can make some nice big little display shelves for like matchbox cars or something. But I thought I might incorporate something else into this project. I was rummaging around in the shed before, looking for inspiration, and I found this old picture frame. Now, I do save a lot of frames. I often get prints and paintings in the shop that really aren't of much value, or they're damaged or something, and I often keep the frames. This one's a nice textured timber. It's not overly old. You can see the corners here are actually got little pressed in sections, so this is probably within the last 20 years maybe. The string has been stapled on as well, all telltale signs of a modern frame, but it's nice timber. So the plan I have is to use these slats to make a little shallow shelf setup, almost like a shadow box within the frame. So I'll make a square out of these, and it's going to be a bit hard to show you one-handed, but if I make basically a frame to go within the other frame, and then I'll put a few little shelves in it, and that will be all essentially within this large picture frame, and it will hang on the wall kind of like a bit of a shadow box. Should look really nice, I think, and it's a good use of this frame. And I also found another frame that would be suitable. This one here, still got a painting in it, but it's a nice pine timber that kind of matches the slats. Similar size to the other one, perhaps a little bit smaller. And that's not a saleable piece. It's apart from the fact that it's been wet a bit. The painting is kind of one that only your mother could love. It was done by Howard, looks like 1978. So no offence, Howard, but I think the frame's of more value than your painting. Feel free to give me a thumbs down on this video if you happen to be watching. But yeah, I'll get to it, and I'll make a square frame to fit each picture frame, and then we'll put some shelves in it and see how it looks. I'll probably take all the timber home to my workshop and do that there. Here we are back in the home workshop. I've removed the string from the back of this picture frame and given it a bit of a sand. There was a little bit of glue and residue left on there, so that's cleaned up nicely now. And I'm cutting some of these slats to fit, and I'll make a box section, as I said earlier, first. So I've trimmed the ends up. I'm not worried about the nail holes in the middle. In fact, I think they added a bit of character. So I'll just work it so that they're kind of positioned in the middle, various randomly sort of positioned. I don't want them at the end because they could actually split when I'm trying to attach the timber. But so I'll cut a few of these up and we'll make our square frame first, and we'll work out how many shelves we want to put in the middle. For those that haven't done much carpentry, always square the ends up first, and it will bring it back to nice solid timber rather than areas where it may be split a bit. So I'll cut this section off and then we'll measure it up and we'll cut the other end, and I'll just show you how to get it nice and neat because we want a fairly precision length here. We want it to fit in nicely and not be sloppy and not be too tight. Now, pine is a fairly soft timber, so I'm using a saw with fairly fine teeth. We don't want it too coarse. And we'll cut right along the edge of the line. Now, I've already cut the first one, so I'm going to do the second one as using the first one as a measurer. So we've got that end flush, and what we're going to do here is just draw a line across here with a nice fine point on our pencil. And if you can see that line there, now we need to be aware when we're cutting what part we want to cut. In this case, we just want to take the line off. Sometimes you'll be cutting and you'll run the saw down the side of the line. Other times you'll actually be taking the line clean off. Just depends on your situation, so you need to be aware, because the difference can be the width of the saw blade, or the teeth at least, which can be a millimetre or so depending on your saw, and that'll make a fair difference. Now, you also don't want to get confused about which end you're keeping, because this line happens to be almost in the middle, and I need to remember that this end here is the end I want, so I'm cutting just slightly to one side of the line and just taking the line off. If we wanted this end, we would actually need to cut just slightly to this side of the line. So it'll make a difference of a millimetre or so, and when you're after a precision cut, you need to have your wits about you. And the easiest way to remember that is once you've made your line, immediately just put a cross on the piece that you don't want. So if you spin the piece of timber around 2 or 3 times, or if you drop it on the floor accidentally, there's no confusion about which side of the line you need to cut and which piece you're going to use. If you need this piece later, then pencil sands off very easily anyway, so there's no problems there. Now, it does take a bit of practice with a hand saw to get accurate. Sure, you know, most of the guys that do a lot of carpentry work will have all the right equipment, and they'll have drop saws and buzz saws and everything. I do like to use hand tools, and by showing you this in my projects, anyone can go and make this sort of stuff. You don't have to set up a very expensive workshop. So if we get the length right, it should fit in neatly, and just press in. So that's pretty good. Alright, so now we've got both sides done. So we'll cut some end pieces and make our square. So there we have our inner square frame. It sits in there very snugly. The join should be good. Now, I haven't glued, nailed or anything. I've just tapped this together as I've cut it. And I think we'll find that I can lift it up just with the board. So that shows you how neatly I've got the joins. And they tapped in beautifully. So yeah, as I said earlier, it takes a bit of practice to get your cuts that accurate, but it's well worth doing. It's a nice skill to have, and you do need patience. So now that we've got that frame done, you can see how it's going to start to take shape. I think it's going to look great. So, all right, we need to work out now how many shelves we're going to have in it and what sort of look we want, because we won't just have straight shelves. most shadow box designs usually have a few different size squares. So we'll have a bit of a play with some of the timber and see what we come up with. Now your design's really going to depend on what you want to put in it, and I've decided to make this one a little display of some antique bottles, and they're all just small chemist and perfume bottles. So I've just used a couple of the different sizes here to measure at roughly the distances. I'm going to have two, as you can see, two distinct shelves. Well, it'll give three, but I've got two dividers to accommodate the different size bottles. And I thought I might put two dividers in the bottom section, maybe one in the middle, and then maybe two at the top, just to mix it up again. It'll look symmetrical. But your design really depends on what you want to use it for. You could go to the trouble of having a more unsymmetrical look with, you know, a box in this corner and then maybe a larger box down this side and then a couple of little shelf pieces. It's totally up to you. Of course, it takes more time to cut all the little bits, and we want to get them fairly accurate so that they fit snugly. So I'll just put some dividers in now that I've set my shelf heights, and then we'll just use some fine nails and glue it all together. And that shelf assembly at this stage won't be connected to the frame, and I'll show you why in a minute. And there's my shelf layout. I think that looks kind of good. As I said, it's symmetrical. I do like things symmetrical. And all we need to do now is to assemble it. Now I've just taken some measurements to absolutely make sure that it is symmetrical. So I've measured in from each end and marked on the cross piece where all the dividers have got to go, because I will assemble this outside the frame, and I'll show you in a minute. Those marks will sand off. This is actually the back anyway, so that's no dramas. I'm going to sand all the individual pieces just to make sure that they're nice on the inside and there's no pencil marks left or any burrs or anything. And then we'll assemble it with some glue and small nails, and then I'll sand the top and the bottom, and then we'll fit it back into the main frame, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that shortly. So I've sanded all the pieces, and now I'm just assembling the main frame. A little bit of PVA glue on the end of the piece, and some nice fine nails. They're very fine, so there shouldn't be any troubles with splitting. If you're worried that your timber's a bit prone to splitting, you could drill a very fine hole, or you could turn the nail upside down and give it one little punch with the head of the nail into the timber, and that seems to prevent splitting. So this is a little fiddly. I'm assembling it sort of from the inside out because I need to get obviously hammer these little nails in, and once I've got this piece up here, you can't kind of swing a hammer, so I'm working from one side, and I'll assemble this middle piece and then drop it into that frame that we've already finished. Should all fit up nicely, and once it's all together it'll square up, and then I'll leave the glue set. Righto, that's now glued and nailed, and now it looks a bit wonky, and there's a reason for that. When you are cutting with a handsaw, it's one of the drawbacks of it. It's really hard to get the cut perfectly straight. And I'm not sure if we can focus on that one. See, it's a bit hard to tell, but it's very easy for the saw, even though you're cutting along a line nicely, it's very easy for the saw to go off on a little bit of an angle. Now it's not going to matter, that's why we've glued it as well. So it will square up within the frame, and then I'll nail all that together and I'll leave it set overnight nice and square, and the glue will take up any minor gaps we have. So just about ready to put it all together. Now the frame's all nailed together. I've been right around the sides and put some fine nails into each section. One thing that has become evident is that all these slats, I didn't actually measure them, but they're all sort of slightly different thicknesses. Now, it's flush on the front, but there's a fair step there, and this one actually has a little bit of a taper Some of them are very rough, some are smooth, that's got a very fine split in it. But it's the nature of working with recycled timber or reclaimed timber. You can see there's quite a step there, so that slat there is a fair bit wider than what this one is. I've made sure they're all flat at the front, or within reason, and we'll just run the sander across it once it's all set, just to sort of level it all out. But it's the nature of working with second-hand timber. You know, you could go and buy new stuff that's all perfectly flat, level, and the same thickness, but you know, that takes the whole fun out of repurposing something, remembering that these slats were actually off an old bed frame. So it'll be fine, and it doesn't hurt to have a few little quirks. As I said, I quite like the nail holes in it. They add a bit of character. And we'll just now put it back in the frame to set overnight, nice and square. The glue will all dry, hold it all together firmly, and then we'll give it a bit of a sand. It's the next evening now. I'm back out in the shed tonight, and I've just given this a nice sand with the orbital sander. It doesn't matter so much on the back because this will face the wall, but I did want it fairly even in that it will sit against the wall, and you don't want big gaps anywhere. The other alternative is that you could even put a sheet of plywood on the back of this and actually have a back on it, in which case you want it fairly flat as well. So that's done. We'll pop it out of the frame now because it's still just tapped in there, and we'll sand the front and get that looking nice and neat because that'll be the most visible. Then we'll just talk about a few options, and pretty much our project's finished. Alright, so here's the front. Now I changed my mind with the orbital sander, and all I've done is just gone over it with a bit of paper just by hand, and all I've done is taken off some of the pencil marks and just smoothed off some of the burrs. But I actually kind of like the rough sawn look, and I didn't want to take it back too much. So it's smooth, a couple of little burrs still, but it's a real rustic pine rough sawn look. It still shows the grain, and the shelves themselves are quite smooth and well sanded, so I think it's a nice contrast, and I reckon it'll look great. So it's a bit hard to appreciate it against the table because that you've got a wood grain behind it, but I'll put it back in the frame and I'll show you how I'm going to mount it, and then we can hang it on the wall. And we just need to put some hangers on it, and we can put some bottles in and see how it looks. Okay, so I'm just going to put it back in the frame now and just show you how well it actually fits. I'll put that in there and just presses down beautifully. It's such a good fit. We barely even need to attach it, but I'll show you what I'm going to do to make sure it's safe. Alright, so I'm just going to attach it with some little brackets. I'll just put 4 little brackets, 2 on each side should be enough. I could put 2 top and 2 bottom, it doesn't really make much difference. It's just going to hold it within the frame and stop anything falling out or coming loose. If you wanted to actually have this shadow box with a glass front, you could put a piece of glass under first and then press this in behind the glass and then put your brackets on. The only trouble with that is once it's hanging on the wall, yeah, you've got a great display behind glass and it won't get dusty. But if one, say we're putting little bottles, and if one happens to get a knock and it falls over, the only way to fix it is to take the whole thing off the wall carefully, because the bottles may fall out of the back. You could put a sheet of ply on the back and actually have a permanent sandwich display, but again, if a bottle falls over, you have to take it apart to fix it. So I'm not going to have a back or a front. I'm just going to put these brackets on now. We'll find some hangers that will probably come off these side pieces, and then we can hang it up and put some bottles on and admire our work. Brackets on, she's all secure. I must admit I did cheat a little bit here because the only screws I had in my shed were these little ones, and they're not quite little enough, because had I put them through into that wood there, it would have actually poked out on the inside. So I put the brackets on where I had verticals, so the screw actually went into those, and the same on the other side. I put the brackets on there and on there. The screws were fine to go through the frame, they weren't too long. Last thing you want to do is have a screw poke through out into the front, so you've always got to consider that. As you all know, I dislike buying anything retail. These brackets and these screws actually came from a shed I cleaned out a while back. Someone had obviously bought them and they were in lots of jars of nails and screws and brackets and things, so I always keep them because I use them on projects. So we're finished, it's all secure. How's that looking? Pretty good. The rough sawn finish to the front of the shelves kind of looks good against the textured frame. And then you've got nice smooth shelves. The little nails don't matter because once we've got things on the shelves you'll never see them. So there we go. Now to find some brackets and we can hang it up and put some little bottles in it and see how it looks. I'm looking forward to having a look at the finished product. And there's the finished product. I had to fabricate a bit of a wall here because I don't have any spare walls. And I didn't want to go and put some nails inside the house. So I've just got a heavy bit of whiteboard here, and how good does that look? All those bottles look fantastic. I like the white background, it highlights the bottles. Depending what your collectible is, sometimes a darker background can look better. For example, if you had nice little pieces of china, maybe thimbles, sewing thimbles, something like that. If they're white, they'll look better with a darker background. I do really like this. I had to set up an extra light here so that we could see it. It's giving us lots of shadows. And it is a shadow box after all. But there you go. There's a lot of early 1900s, some are even late 1890s, little essence bottles and eucalyptus bottles, some perfumes. And they look fantastic in that display. So some slats off an old bed base, a picture frame that just had a pretty ugly print in it, and a little bit of time, and there we go. Very happy with that upcycle project. I'll probably put that one in the shop. And look, I don't know what I'd sell it for. Doesn't really matter. I've enjoyed the project. We've shown you that we can upcycle some stuff. So keep an eye on my channel if you like these sort of things. We'll catch you in the next one.